Well, welcome along to this video, which is a companion video to the press release issued by the RLA today. The Residential Landlords Association has written to the new Minister for Justice about reforming the court system in respect of the abolition of Section 21. And here at Property Tribes, we're so fortunate to have the input of RLA Policy Director David Smith. And David, Section 21 still ongoing, of course, but now we've had a change of ministers, a change of housing minister. Obviously, it's still in the pipeline, but is it going to change the direction of travel at all?
Well, that's the multi-million dollar question, isn't it? I think we've got to assume that it won't. Any other type of assumption would be risky. The consultation, since we last spoke, the consultation has been released. The RLA, of course, has finished its landlord survey and produced the results, which is one of the reasons why we've written to the Minister of Justice. Got a whole new government, obviously. But the reality is that the government policy was set before the Prime Minister changed. It may be that the new Prime Minister and the new ministerial teams in the various departments have a different view of Section 21. That may well be the case. But I doubt they're going to completely U-turn without good reason. So the key thing at the moment is for the consultation to be responded to, for as many landlords as possible to make their views known through the consultation, and then as we come through into the autumn, when these ministers are really back at their desks, of course it's parliamentary recess, so they're not in as much, but when they're really at their desks grappling with this stuff, then we need to get them to think again. And there is an opportunity for sure to get these people to think again about what they're doing and whether this is the right way to go, particularly in the line of the potential now for a no-deal Brexit in October. But it would be unwise for anybody to say that they knew for sure that there was going to be a different position in government at this stage. I can understand why people would want to be hopeful, and there are grounds for some hope. It is a different group of ministers. In fact, in a sense, the whole government is different. So there will undoubtedly be changes of thinking. But of course, the civil servants don't change. They are the institutional memory, so some of that gets carried on. And of course, it's still a Conservative government, and while it's a slightly different flavour of Conservative government, they won't want to be seen as abandoning promises that we made. There's a political point here as well. Of course, you've got to bear in mind that part of the reason for doing this from their perspective is that tenants vote and they want them to vote Conservative, and that hasn't changed.
Indeed. Now, the concerns are that if Section 21 is abolished, it will put a lot more pressure on the court system because obviously Section 8 does generally involve going to court. So just explain again the RLA's concerns over this and what they hope to get across to the new Justice Minister.
Well, it's important to bear in mind that not every landlord has to go to court every time, and of course landlords don't want to go to court if they can possibly avoid it. It's not good for them, it's not good for tenants, it's not great for anybody, it costs a lot of money, it's an unpleasant business for all concerned. But what we found in our landlord survey is that nearly 80% of landlords who have used the court system have been dissatisfied with it. Now, of course, you can immediately say, well, they're just whining, aren't they? But the reality is any business or any service which has an 80% dissatisfaction rate needs to think a little bit about what's going on. And undoubtedly there are problems with underinvestment, there are problems with overly complex forms, there are problems with speed generally. And if the government is committed to changing Section 21, we've been very clear throughout that this has to come as part of a package deal, and the government has indicated that they do see it as part of a package deal. You can't change things in one area without changing things which link up to it, rely on it. So if we are going to get rid of Section 21, then certainly we would see some elements of Section 8 and some Section 8 grounds to be things that would have to be done by the same paper-based process that people like using for Section 21, the accelerated claims process. But at the same time, we want that process to be better. We need to see improvements in things like county court bailiffs. It's completely unacceptable, really, that if a landlord has got a possession order that says a tenant has to leave, they're then subject to enormous delays, up to 8 weeks, to wait for a bailiff to enforce the order. The government has suggested in the consultation they can knock a week off that, But really, that's only going from 8 to 7. That's think we could do a bit better than a week. We would like to see that taken right down. And then at the same time, we've also got to look at local authorities. Local authorities are still, and they shouldn't be, encouraging tenants to wait for bailiffs, wait until the bailiff comes before they'll rehome them. That is not what the Homelessness Reduction Act requires. And if there are local authorities who are doing that, they are breaking the law, and they will be found out. And we are looking actively to pursue a case against local authorities who are doing that, because they shouldn't be doing it. It is bad for landlords, obviously, but it's bad for tenants as well, because that ultimately means that what they're saying to the tenant is, instead of finding you a new home that you can move into on a permanent basis, we're going to ask you to sit there in increasing stress and fear and wait to the last possible minute, and then we'll just stick you in overnight emergency B&B accommodation for a few weeks while we find you something else. That's bad for tenants, it's bad for everybody, it's bad for society.
Well, it is bad for the tenant, because they could potentially get a CCJ against them, which may affect their ability to access private sector accommodation in the future.
Yes, and this is something that the government's oddly calm about. It's previously said, well, tenants don't get CCJs if they pay the court fee, but then of course ideally no one would have to pay a court fee, and it would all be and people would be moved before the court became necessary. And the Ministry of Justice also said, well, court fees have gone up and we're really happy because that now possession orders are a profit centre for the Ministry of Justice, but they're kind of missing the point, because of course the court fees are tax deductible. So all the Ministry of Justice is really saying is that they've managed to get to enable landlords to deduct money from the Treasury without the Treasury immediately realising that they've given it to the MOJ. I mean, shouldn't it be more honest for the Ministry of Justice to say to the Treasury, we need more money to run our services, rather than finding back doorways to get it off people's income tax? It's a deeply perverse set of statements, and the net cost isn't seen. You know, the damage to tenants' mental health, to schooling, and all of these things are costs that society ultimately has to bear in terms of other, in terms of crime budgets or public health budgets or whatever it might be, and those costs are all hidden. And so we say, oh, we're saving money by increasing court fees or making tenants wait till the bailiff comes, but we're not. We're costing society a lot of money somewhere else. It's just concealed. And it would be a lot better if everybody was rehomed into suitable accommodation as soon as possible, rather than this situation where we get people to wait and then put them in the worst possible emergency accommodation.
I think this is one of those scenarios that perfectly illustrates that if you tweak a lever in the private rented sector legislation, that can have enormous knock-on effects and kind of collateral damage. And this is definitely a case with Section 21. And, it does, we wonder who ever came up with this idea to abolish Section 21. Did they really consider all of these knock-on effects? Because it's just a very broad headline to say, oh yes, we're going to get rid of Section 21, but not to actually think about the ramifications of that.
And that is a problem. Of course, it cuts across several departments. You're actually talking about things that are partly in the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, some of which is Ministry of Justice. It actually connects to the Department for Work and Pensions. And of course, then it filters down to all those different local authorities around the country who have their own issues with temporary accommodation. Those are all devolved down to local authorities. So in fact, it's a lot of different people, and it's kind of frustrating. It's one of the things that we've expressed our frustration with the MHCLG, that they have indicated it's a package arrangement, but we don't think they're doing enough yet to really get that point across and to really make it work across the whole sphere.
Indeed. So is the RLA in favour of the court reform, or are you also, looking at this option to have a separate housing court with specialist kind of judges presiding over that?
Well, the RLA has been talking about court reform for a long time now, long before we even got onto Section 21. So, I mean, from one perspective, we are pleased to see court reform of any sort. We think the correct way to do it is by a specialist housing court, because the reality is that court reform doesn't cure the problem that some things go to the county court, so possession matters and some tenant disrepair. Some stuff goes to a tribunal, so it goes to the first tier tribunal property if it's an HMO licensing matter or a rent repayment order for a tenant. It goes to the first tier tribunal general regulatory chamber if it's unlawful agent fees under the Tenant Fees Act or a lack of consumer redress, or it goes to the magistrates' court if it's an Environmental Protection Act claim or a prosecution. So you've actually, just at the lowest tier, without involving high courts, court of appeals, upper tribunals or anything else, you've managed to involve 4 separate courts or tribunals in one thing. That just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to us. And making some small piece reform in the county court, of course, we're pleased about, but we think realistically you've got to look at it more in a more holistic manner and really think about it as treating housing with the respect it deserves, and bringing together all the different diverse bits from 4 different courts and tribunals into one place, into one specialised housing court with people who understand housing. If I was talking about intellectual property, for example, and said we need an intellectual property court, the government would say yes, absolutely, and they've done it. I think it's wrong to suggest that housing's not that important, and it seems to me what the government's implying by saying, oh, we don't need a specialist court for it, when all these other things have it as well. Housing affects everybody. How can it not be important?
Well, it'll be very interesting to see what happens going forwards, but there's not going to be any real action anytime soon, because obviously the new government getting their feet under the table, metaphorically speaking. Then we've got the summer parliamentary recess. Obviously consultation still ongoing. We want all landlords to participate in that, but we probably won't get any further updates or direction until into the autumn.
No, probably not. The RLA was quite keen on a long consultation timeline to let everybody have an opportunity to respond, and we're quite pleased that the government's done that. Of course, there's a side point here, and one of the reasons to have a long consultation is it allows government to change over, and everyone recognises that one of the reasons for the longer thing was that there would be new ministers coming in. And of course, the ministers are going to want to read the consultation, digest it, and think about it. So, in practice, that's probably a good thing from our perspective. I think that rushing into these kind of things is a mistake, and there was a bit of an unseemly rush at the start in terms of the way it was announced. I think it's a good opportunity now that the announcement is there to let everyone have a say, and to think about what the right way is to progress. We need to avoid further shocks to the housing market and to the economy, particularly as we head potentially towards October 31st and possibly quite an unsettled economic period. Whether you think it's good or bad is I'm not going to go there, but certainly it'll be complicated for people and confusing, and so perhaps we need to just have a little think about where we're trying to go with our housing market before doing anything else.
And indeed, and hopefully some continuity with the housing ministers, because obviously there's been a revolving door in recent times. So have you got any first impressions of the new incumbents?
Well, an important point to bear in mind is actually there's a different number of ministers in MHCLG, and they don't all have the same responsibilities. So Heather Wheeler was actually the Housing and Homelessness Minister. There is no replacement for her. There is no Housing and Homelessness Minister.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So we're not clear what the actual responsibilities are yet and how they will break down, and it remains to be seen. I think one thing that was quite notable about, so far anyway at least, was that Esther McVeigh's first speech was more about house building, and there hasn't really been any major comment from anyone in MHCLG at a ministerial level on the private rented sector. That doesn't mean they're not interested in it or they don't have views about it, but clearly current priorities are more about building homes, which of course we're terribly keen on. We think the government should be building more houses, and as I have said, and we have said many times before, it's time to stop blaming landlords for the failure of government to build houses and to build some houses.
Absolutely.
And perhaps that will finally happen.
Well, let's keep our fingers crossed that is the case. But obviously Section 21 is going to continue to be a trending topic within the private rented sector, and certainly here on Property Tribes. And as always, thank you to David for his updates in this regards, and please do contribute to the consultation. We've got plenty of time to do it. The more landlords that contribute, obviously the greater our voice and our opinions will be at a government level. So David, we're just going to reiterate again, do the consultation.
Yeah, absolutely. The RLA will have its draft consultation available shortly on our website, and obviously we're happy for people to use ideas from that, and obviously to feed us back things that they think we've missed out. But of course it's important that everybody has their own say as well. Please don't just rely on the RLA to represent your position. The more responses, the better.
Of course. Strength in numbers. So Property Tribes bringing you all the updating news of direction of travel of the Section 21 consultation. If you're watching on YouTube, we do invite you to subscribe and also to click across to propertytribes.com. That is where our discussions are hosted. But for now, thank you to David and thank you to you for watching.